Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with the Dicey Review, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 1 to 4 player game Founders of Teotihuacan being released from Boards and Dice. Now, Founders of Teotihuacan is kind of a worker placement, tile placement game with some really interesting systems for action strength, kind of contract completion, and some really fun polyomino tile placement puzzles. So we're going to look at how the game plays, and then afterwards we'll talk a little bit about what I think about the game and maybe who it's for. Now, in a game of Founders of Teotihuacan, players are trying to take their action discs that they have access to from the start of the game and that they will slowly lose throughout the game, and take those action discs to place them on spaces of the board to take various actions. The various actions that you can take will usually relate to either building a tile of some type or taking what the game calls an influence action, where you can choose a few different options of what to do. Now, like I said, on a player's turn, they can either take an action or they can pass. And if they want to take an action, they can select from 1 to 3 of their action discs to place on any one of the open spaces. Now, in a 2-player game like we have set up here, there may be some spaces that aren't available to you. And the reason that you can select from 1 to 3 of your discs is that each space can only have up to 4 discs on them, and that includes these bonus discs. And the reason that you might want to put more of these action discs on a space is that will increase the strength of your action. So for instance, if you were to put 3 action discs on this particular action space, you could either take a build action in this section of the board, or take this influence action in this section of the board at a strength of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, including the bonus discs. And you can even place your disc on top of other players' discs or your own discs on a later turn as well. So for instance, if a player wanted to go to this space, they could put the last available disc there, filling that action spot with 4 discs and taking an action with a strength of 4. Now, the reason that you might want to take a higher strength action usually relates to the build actions. For instance, if you were to take an action strength of 4 by placing this disc on this stack, you would be able to select any of the tiles from a size 4 down, whereas if you were to take an action with a strength of, say, 2, you would only be able to select a tile with a space of 2 down. So the action strength that you select can be really important depending on what you want to do on your turn. In addition, if you're the first player to come and cover one of these bonus disc tiles, you get to take that bonus, which is really powerful because that can allow you to have a special ability, or it can even allow you to take an extra action. For instance, if you were the first player to cover up this disc, you would immediately get 2 victory points. Or if you were the first player to cover up this disc, it would allow you to take any influence action, including actions from a different section from where you placed, for free before or after completing your main build or influence action that you decide to do from placing your main disc. So that's kind of an extra bonus turn that you could get. This bonus disc is a similar type setup, but instead of taking an influence action, you're taking a build action at the same strength that you place these discs. So for instance, if you place 2 discs, you would have a strength of 3 to either build or do an influence, and then you would get to take a bonus strength of 3 build action from that bonus disc. And these discs can give you a variety of powers, like for instance, this one would give you a victory point bonus of 1, and it would allow you to boost your strength for this action with that little disc and an arrow up by 1. So for instance, if you were to place these 2 discs, you would normally have a strength of 3, but since you covered that bonus, it would give you a strength of 4. So these bonus discs can give you all kinds of various cool placement abilities. Now, when you take a build action, there are 3 different types of buildings that you could build. You could build these production buildings, you could build these temples, or you could build these pyramid tiles. In this example, since I've placed a strength of 3, I would first get my bonus of a couple of points, and then I would be able to select a size 3 building or smaller to place on my board, and each of these buildings relates to a particular type of resource, gold, wood, or stone. And let's say that I decided to place this gold building. Once these buildings are gone, they're gone for the round, so there's a bit of a time crunch if you want to get to these buildings first. You then get to place your building on your board somewhere, but there's a bit of a restriction, which is one of my favorite parts of the game. There's this architect right here, and this meeple will rotate around your board as you play, and this meeple creates what the game calls an architect's reach, which is where you can build your tiles. So for instance, if I wanted to place this gold producing tile on my board somewhere, I would have to place it in one of these two squares within my architect's reach. If my architect were to move down here on my next turn, I would then only be able to build in these two quadrants of the board, and once it rotates down here, I would only be able to build in these two quadrants of the board, and so on. And when you're placing these buildings down onto the board, you can place them in any space within the architect's reach. They don't have to be adjacent. And very specifically, these resource buildings can be placed in a couple of different ways to give you bonuses. The first thing is, if you cover up any of these mask buildings like this, if any of these sections are fully covered, you would then be able to grab the top mask off of the matching mask pile, which will give you in-game victory points. So if you're the first to completely cover one of these little sections right here, you get some extra victory points. And the different color masks will have differing values. Blue has the highest value, and then purple has the next highest values, and then you have greens. Also, when you place down resource producing buildings, you can place resources of that building's type around that building in adjacent spaces. So not diagonal spaces, but in orthogonally adjacent spaces. So I could, if I wanted to, place resources in all of the spaces around this building on the board. And what that does for me is that gives me access to resources that I can then spend to do other cool things in the game, which we'll look at now. Quickly before we do that though, you'll notice that there are some other buildings that I've built because you get to place some of these tiles during setup, which gives you some bonuses that you can build things out. So I already have access to some stone and some wood from setup. The other two types of build actions that you can take is you can come to the middle section of the board to build temples, or you can come to this most right section of the board to build pyramid tiles. Now, one thing that is interesting about these particular buildings is that they require resources to be built. And based on your action strength, you may have to pay extra resources depending on what you're wanting to build. You can always build any of these temples regardless of your action strength, but for each action strength value that you're short, you have to pay extra resources that are shaded in these gray spaces. So for instance, if I wanted to build a green temple, the action strength threshold for that is 3. The action strength threshold for this one is 4, and for this one is 5, matching up to their squares in their shape. Since I have an action strength of 2 in this example, I could build a green temple if I wanted to. I would have to pay the green temple's base cost of a stone and a wood, and then I would have to pay an additional wood for each action strength value that I'm short. So in this example, 1 extra wood. If I were wanting to build a strength 5 temple, however, I would have to pay the base cost of a stone and a gold. And then in addition, I would have to pay a stone for each action strength value that I was short to meet that level of action strength. So in this instance, since I have a 2, I'm 3 short of the 5 required value, so I would have to pay 3 extra stone in addition to the temple's base cost. And it's the exact same thing with these temple tiles. Each temple tile has a base action strength of 4, and for each action strength that you're short, you would have to pay additional resources highlighted in this window over here. So if I were to come here, since I were to get a +1 power bonus, I would normally have an action strength of 2, but with my bonus I have an action strength of 3, which leaves me 1 short of the threshold for building a pyramid tile. So I would have to pay 2 gold and a wood, and then an additional gold for the 1 that I'm short of meeting that threshold for these tiles. One other cool thing about building temples in particular is whenever you place a temple of a specific color, you get to choose one of these contracts that matches the color of the temple you just placed. And these contracts will give you the ability to get points for doing certain things or spending certain resources, which is something that can be done as an influence action. You can turn in a contract or complete a contract by taking an influence action, which can give you a number of victory points depending on what you want to do. And these contracts will have all kinds of different requirements. For instance, you could spend up to 10 gold, getting a point per gold to complete this contract. You could spend a combination of 10 resources exactly to get 12 points. For some of these different contracts, some of them will actually allow you to take an additional action and get some points, or this one will let you get 8 points if you have a gray building of this shape and a gold building of this shape placed on your board. Now, to pay resources for building temple tiles or pyramid tiles, you have to remove those resources from your board. So for instance, to build this blue temple, we need to spend some stone and potentially some wood if we are short on action strength. So to do that, you would have to remove the 2 stone required from your board, And then you would be able to place these temple tiles. Now, the temple tiles have the exact same restriction where you have to place them in your architect's reach. So for instance, I could place this temple tile on anywhere in this section or anywhere in this section with this current architect setup. Now, I could put my temple tile right here to try and cover up most of the required spaces to try and get this color of a mask, but to do that, I would have to get rid of some resources. That's something that you have to take account of when you're playing the game, is if you want to place tiles in a certain way and they cover up resources, you have to get rid of those resources first, even if you're not spending them to build that tile. If you are building a pyramid tile, you get to place them in these middle sections of the board, but you still have to pay attention to your architect's reach. So for instance, if I were to build my pyramid tile with the architect right here, you can build in the 6 sections of the middle that match up to where your architect is. So if the architect is right here, I could build in either one of these 6 sections. If the architect were over, or let's say down here, I could build in any one of these 6 sections. So the architect determines where you can build your pyramid tiles. And you can build your pyramid tiles on different levels depending on what's set up below them. So for instance, I could either build on these first level spaces right here, and if you build over these first level spaces, you get bonuses that you get to do right away when you place that building tile. You always get 2 points right away just for buying and placing a pyramid tile rather. But you can also place a pyramid tile on a second level depending on how your tiles are set up. If all 4 of the tiles kind of create a base, you can place a pyramid tile on a second level right here. And the reason that you might want to do this is one of the main in-game scoring goals or scoring components for this game is pyramid tiles in a section with matching color temple tiles. So for instance, at the end of the game, you will score 2 points for each temple tile that matches the color of a pyramid tile within that zone. So even like for the first level pyramid tile, you get 2 points for each matching color temple. So I would get 4 points in this example. If you have a second level pyramid tile, you would get 3 points for each matching temple. So I would get 6 points for this second level tile if I were to place it like this. And the cool thing is that this counts even if this tile is partially covering that zone. So for instance, if this tile, that's an illegal placement, but just for examples, if this tile were right here, it would give me points for blue temples in this zone or this zone, since this zone matches up. And a similar way, a similar placement thing with temple tiles, even if a temple tile is partially covering or within a zone where a pyramid tile is kind of giving its influence, you also get points for that. So even if a blue temple tile were being placed right here, you would still get to score it with these pyramid tiles at the end of the game. So this is one of the major kind of puzzles that you have to think through as you're playing this game, is how you want to combine your temple tiles and your pyramid tiles for in-game scoring points. Now, instead of taking one of the 3 build actions on your turn, you can also take influence actions on the bottom sections of the board. So for instance, in this section, instead of building, you can take one of these 2 options as an influence action. The different influence actions are pretty straightforward. This one will allow you to either produce 1 resource of a type around each of your buildings on the board. So for instance, if you had 4 wood buildings, you could place 1 cube next to each of those wood buildings, and the same thing for gold and stone. Or you could just place 2 single tiles. So there are these single tiles for stone and wood, and they can be placed anywhere on the board, and they will produce resources just like these bigger buildings when they're placed on the board. So you can place a couple of those out to fill in some gaps, help cover up kind of some sections that you want to fill in some mask zones, things like that. You can also take an influence action to complete a contract. So these contracts, like I said, will have a variety of different conditions that you may want to be going for. So if you come down here, you can take this action to complete this contract. Say you've got these 2 building types, and then you get 8 points, which would allow you to get some extra scoring. This is one of the major ways that you can score points in the game. The other influence action that you can take is you can move up along this track down here. This does a couple of things for you. First, you get the indicated number of victory points for each space that you move. So if you move right here, you would get a couple of victory points. If you move right here, you would get 4 victory points. And you can also kind of refresh your contract tiles if you want to. So you can turn in any contract that you have that you don't think you're going to be able to complete to the bottom of the appropriate stack, and then pick one of the 2 remaining contracts to replace that one that you're shuffling in. Players will continue taking turns during a round until everyone consecutively passes or uses all of their discs in a round. And then the round marker will move, everyone will lose one of their action discs, and then these bonus tiles will be reshuffled and replaced out. So the bonuses that you receive won't be the same for each section, each game, or each round of the game, rather. And the game will end at the end of the round where the sun marker is occupying the same space as the eclipse marker. Most of the scoring that you do during the game will happen immediately. For instance, whenever you get to take a mask by covering up a space, you'll immediately get those points. Whenever you complete a contract during the game, you'll immediately move your point marker to indicate that you have those points. The end of the game scoring will consist of your pyramid tile scoring. So like we talked about earlier, for each color of temple matching a pyramid tile in that zone, or even halfway into that zone, will give you victory points. You'll get 2 points for each tile that matches a pyramid, each temple that matches a pyramid in the first level, each pyramid tile that's on the second level that matches that temple zone, you would get 3 points for. And if you are really a pyramid building machine, you can even build a 3rd level on the pyramid tile if all 4 of the sections below this piece are supported like you show here. And this upper level pyramid would give 3 points per matching temple as well. And if it's in the middle like this, all of the zones are connected to this pyramid tile. So any blue temple on the board would work to give you points for this one at the end game scoring. And whoever has the most victory points would be the winner. So I was really excited to take a look at this game initially because it's from the same company that released Teotihuacan City of Gods, which is a heavier weight Euro game that I really enjoyed. And I love that they had released a similar game in the same theme as that game. I will say very much, if you are a fan of that game and are looking for that game in this game, it is not the same game at all. It's very different. But overall, I thought that this one was really fun. There are a lot of really cool elements to this game, a lot of planning and different strategies that you can take. Some of the really cool things are the architect and how that creates reach around your board, where you have to build in very specific regions, and you have to kind of plan ahead because you might be trying to go for a specific type of mask for some in-game points, but you have to remember that on your next turn, you may not be able to build in the same section. So there's really a lot of forethought and planning required in this game, where maybe you have to plan 2 or 3 turns ahead. So I can see how players who really enjoy tactical gameplay, where they just consider what's on the board at the moment and just have to take an action based on that, may find that as a bit of a challenge, where you really have to think 2 or 3 turns ahead. Not only what tiles might be available on the board, but also, is your architect going to allow you to be able to build in that section? There's also some really cool engine building and planning where you have to try and make sure that you have the right types of resources on your board that will, match up with your strategy. Maybe you're really wanting to build a particular pairing of temple types, but you have to make sure that you have the right type of resources to accommodate that. You need to make sure that you have enough gold to build your pyramids, or maybe you're really wanting to lean into the blue temple tiles, so you need to make sure that you have tons of stone available to do that. Or you might want to take a completely different strategy in this game and really just focus on contracts. Don't focus on the temples at all, and just really focus on trying to make sure that you can just churn through contracts and make sure that you can spend lots of resources just straight up for victory points. But if you're going to do that, you have to kind of keep that balance in mind, that other players might be focusing on certain things that allow them to pull away if you don't kind of play that game as well. In general, there are some really cool aspects to this game. The idea of action strength I've seen in other games before, like A Feast for Odin and things like that, where if you place more workers, you get a better version of an action. But it's implemented in this way, in this game, in a way that's pretty cool. Whereas, you can go to the same places that other players have gone. And that's kind of one of those decisions that you have to make whenever you're placing discs on a spot is, I really don't want to waste my action discs taking a 4-strength action and filling up this action spot. But if I only place 2 of them, I'm leaving a 4-strength action open for somebody else if they want to come along and take that action. But at the same time, you might be covering a bonus that somebody else might need. So there's really a lot of thought and planning required, even when you're placing your action discs and trying to plan out in that regard. Now, overall, there's a lot of elements of this game that are not necessarily brand new or innovative things. Like the idea of action strength, like I said, has been introduced in some other games, even though it's a fun, solid mechanic that I like. And the polyomino tile placement has been done quite a bit in a lot of different games, especially recently, ever since you saw games like Patchwork come out that really kind of popularized that mechanic. And the the contract fulfillment aspect of the game has been done in tons of other games. What I think is pretty cool and unique is the way that you place your resources on the board, that they have to be on your board, and you have to take that into account when you're puzzling out your building placement. And also the idea of the architect's reach is something that's very cool, where you have that restriction of where you can build, and it kind of rotates depending on your turn. The other thing that's neat is the pyramid tile. Now this is one thing that they introduced that mechanically and thematically feels pretty cool, right? Where you're building this city in this area of the world in this theme, and the way that you build your temple tiles, the way that you build your pyramids can kind of give your city more prestige, give it more glory. And that's something that I really find thematically cool, and also works pretty fun mechanically as well. So who is this game for? Well, that's kind of a tricky question, because it has elements that a lot of gamers might like. If you like those kind of tile placement spatial puzzle games where you're trying to build a polyomino map in the most effective way possible, this game might be enjoyable for you. If you're also a fan of kind of mid-weight Euro games that involve some kind of some fun engine building aspects, where you're trying to place discs in a worker placement fashion in the right time, in the right way, to kind of maximize your actions and get bonuses, then you might also enjoy that aspect of this game as well. And as far as the other aspects of the game, with the pyramid building and the contract completion, things like that, those are fun, solid, enjoyable elements of the game. So I feel like this game has a pretty wide appeal as far as the weight and complexity. Now, it's something that's going to be a bit meatier than some of your simpler tile placement games, because there are some things going on in this game that you're not going to see in something as simple as a Patchwork, or even maybe something a bit heavier weight of Juve's polyomino games like the Spring Meadow or something like that. It's meatier than that, so there's more meat on the bone as far as that's concerned. So it's not necessarily a lightweight or a family weight game in that regard. It's more of a gamer's game, kind of a medium weight Euro. So for somebody who enjoys that type of weight, but is looking for something with these types of mechanics, that might be really fun. Like somebody who likes a Patchwork style game, but maybe wants something a bit more in depth. For me personally, this is already a game that I was interested in and reached out about. So this is one that I was considering buying anyway. I just wanted to kind of play it a bit more to see how all of the elements work together. And after playing it a few times, honestly, if I were to give it a BGG rating, which is what I have done already, I would give it a 7 out of 10, which is a good game that I'm always willing to play, or usually willing to play. This is one that I'm always, willing to play. I'm glad when it hits the table, but it's not going to be something that's like in my top 10. Now, for me, my very personal tastes, I really prefer kind of heavier weight Euro games that involve tons of engine building and kind of long-term planning and kind of meaty decisions like that. So this game doesn't necessarily fit into that category, but it's one that can kind of bridge the gap between people who like styles of games like I do and people who like lighter games. Maybe it's something a bit, a step ahead for them that you will also enjoy. But overall, I found this one to be really enjoyable. I feel like it's a good game. So if any of the things that I talked about look interesting to you, make sure to go and check this game out. It'll be at Gen Con, and I believe it is now in your friendly local game store. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and until next time, I'll see you at the table.